For 25 years, my son wanted nothing to do with me. He ignored my calls, sent back my letters, and treated me like I had never existed. Then, when word spread that I had sold my company and inherited a fortune, he suddenly appeared with an invitation to Christmas dinner. His voice was warm, his words dripping with false sweetness, but I could hear the hunger for money behind every syllable. I went, yes, but not to play his game. I had been waiting a long time for this moment, and the surprise I carried with me was not the kind he imagined. Before we continue, please subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child abandoned you for decades and only returned when you became wealthy? The phone rang on a cold December evening as I was finishing my supper in the quiet of my Dayton home. I almost let it ring out, but something made me reach for it. The moment I answered, I froze. Dad. It was Matthew, my son, the son who had erased me from his life for 25 years. For a moment, I did not speak. I listened to the sound of his breathing, steady but strained, as if he was rehearsing a role he had not played in decades. Finally, I said his name. Matthew. Yeah, he said quickly, forcing a little laugh. It has been a while. A while, I repeated, though my voice was even. My grip tightened on the receiver. 25 years without a word, and suddenly you call. There was silence. Then his tone turned soft, almost rehearsed. Listen, I was thinking, Christmas is coming. Claire and I would love to have you over for dinner. It is time, Dad. Families should be together. I walked to the window, staring at the frost on the glass. I remembered the empty chairs at every holiday, the returned letters, the birthdays missed. And now he spoke as if those years were just dust swept under the rug. Why now? I asked. He hesitated. Life has been busy. Kids, work, everything. But you are getting older. I am too. It just feels right. I could hear it beneath the words, the faintest slip in his tone. He was not inviting me out of love. It was hunger, greed. My name had been in the papers only weeks before, after I sold my company and received my late brother's inheritance. I was no longer the father he abandoned. I was a man with money. You are right, I said slowly. Family does matter. I will come. His relief was obvious. Great. Christmas Eve, around 6. I will send the address. Do that, I replied, letting the pause stretch. Then I added, Matthew, I have a surprise for you. I heard the spark in his voice instantly, greed slipping through. A surprise? What kind? You will see. I ended the call before he could press further. My hand trembled as I set the phone back in its cradle, not from weakness, but from the storm gathering inside me. For years I had carried the weight of abandonment, the silence of a son who chose wealth and comfort over his own father. But now the chance had come. I stood at the window, watching snow fall thick over Dayton's quiet streets. The past 25 years played in my mind in sharp fragments. The divorce, the betrayal, the day Matthew turned his back on me. Those wounds had never healed. They had only hardened into something sharper. This Christmas would not be about reconciliation. It would be about truth. The falling snow outside pulled me back in time, back to another winter 25 years ago, when everything I had built was ripped away in a matter of weeks. I had thought my marriage was strong, thought my family was unshakable. But betrayal has a way of hiding in plain sight until it finally strikes. Claire had been restless for months. At first, I ignored the signs, the late nights, the whispered phone calls behind closed doors, the way she started dressing sharper, speaking sharper. I told myself it was a phase, that every marriage had rough patches. But one December evening, I came home to find her suitcase open on the bed, clothes piled high, her face set like stone. "You cannot be serious," I had said, standing in the doorway. She did not even pause her packing. "I am done, Daniel. I cannot keep living like this." "Like what?" My voice shook, though I tried to sound firm. "Like a loser's wife," she snapped, her words cutting deeper than any blade. "You work yourself to the bone in that construction company, and what do we have? A small house, bills stacking up, no vacations, no excitement. I deserve more. Matthew deserves more." I stared at her, numb. "We have a family, Claire. We have a son who needs stability that is worth more than cars and vacations." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Robert gives me stability. Real stability. He knows how to treat a woman. He knows how to win." The name hit me like a punch. Robert, the lawyer who had been circling her for months. I should have seen it sooner, should have noticed the way she smiled when his name came up, the way she disappeared on weekends when she claimed she was running errands. "And Matthew?" I asked, my throat dry. "You're going to drag him into this?" "He is old enough to choose," she said coldly. "He knows you are not the kind of father he can look up to. He wants someone successful, someone strong." Later that night, when I confronted Matthew, he looked at me with teenage certainty in his eyes. "Mom is right, Dad. You always talk about dreams, but where are they? Maybe if you had tried harder, we would not be in this mess." I had no words left, just silence. The divorce that followed was swift and brutal. Claire's lawyer was expensive, mine overworked and underpaid. She walked away with the house, the car, and Matthew's loyalty. I was left in a rented apartment with nothing but debts and a heart full of bitterness. The first Christmas after the divorce, I sat alone at my kitchen table. No tree, no presents, just a half-eaten plate of food and the echo of laughter from the neighbors' homes. That was the night I promised myself I would survive. I would build again, even if it killed me. And I did. The years that followed were not easy, but they shaped me. My small construction jobs turned into contracts. Contracts turned into projects. Projects turned into a business. I lived modestly, saved fiercely, and learned to turn pain into discipline. What I did not know then was that fate would eventually hand me more than just survival. The inheritance from my brother was the spark. But the fire had been burning for years. While Claire and Robert enjoyed their fine dinners and vacations, while Matthew looked down at me from a distance, I was quietly building something solid, brick by brick, foundation by foundation. And now, 25 years later, they wanted me back. Not out of love, but out of greed. The snow outside thickened, coating the streets in white silence. I leaned against the window, memories burning inside me like coals. They thought they knew me, thought I was still the broken man they left behind. They were wrong. The years after the divorce were the hardest of my life. I was 45, living in a rented apartment with second-hand furniture and a bank account that never stayed above 3 figures for long. I remember sitting at that small kitchen table, paying bills with trembling hands, wondering how I would ever climb out of the hole I was in. Claire had taken everything. The house, the car, even the friends who decided wealth and appearances mattered more than loyalty. And Matthew, my only son, had chosen her side without hesitation. But pain has a way of sharpening a man. I learned to live lean. I stopped wasting money on things that did not matter. Every dollar I earned from my construction job went either to survival or savings. I stopped eating out, stopped drinking, stopped trying to impress anyone. My life became a straight line: work, home, sleep, repeat. It was lonely, but it was also the crucible where I was forged into someone new. At first, I was just a foreman on small projects. Renovations, roof repairs, sometimes a full house build if the company landed a contract. I worked harder than anyone else, not because I wanted praise, but because I needed purpose. I learned to manage workers, to read blueprints, to spot weaknesses in a structure before they collapsed. Slowly, I gained a reputation for being the man who could finish a project on time, under budget, and built to last. By my late 40s, I had saved just enough to take a risk. There was an old duplex on the south side of Dayton, falling apart, its yard overgrown, its windows broken. Most people saw ruin. I saw opportunity. I took a small loan against my retirement account, added it to my savings, and bought the place. Every evening after work, I drove there with tools rattling in my trunk. I stripped floors, replaced wiring, patched roofs with my own 2 hands. The neighbors thought I was crazy, but within 6 months I had turned it into 2 livable units. I rented them to a young couple on one side and a retired woman on the other. Their rent covered my mortgage and left me with a little extra. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was building something again. That one duplex became 2, then 3. Every bit of profit went back into the business. Weekends disappeared into sawdust, paint, and late-night calculations scrawled on scrap paper. I barely noticed the years passing. When friends asked why I never remarried, I told them I was too busy. The truth was, I had no energy left for love. My loyalty had been broken once, and that wound never closed. By the time I was in my late 50s, I owned a dozen properties across Dayton. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make headlines, but they provided steady income and security. Tenants respected me because I respected them. I fixed problems quickly, kept rents fair, and in return they stayed. The same neighbors who once pitied me now nodded with respect when I drove by. But the real turning point came when my brother Thomas passed away. He had lived a quiet life, never married, never had children. He ran a small business that supplied materials to contractors and invested his money carefully. When he died, I was stunned to learn that he had left everything to me. The estate was worth several million. I wept the day I heard the lawyer read his will, not just for the loss of my brother, but because after years of scraping by, someone had finally believed I deserved more. That inheritance, combined with what I had built through sheer stubbornness, transformed me. Suddenly, I was not just a man who owned a handful of properties. I was wealthy, quietly wealthy. I did not buy a mansion or a luxury car. I stayed in the same modest house, drove my old pickup, wore the same work boots. But beneath that simple exterior, I now carried power. Of course, news spreads in a city like Dayton. The sale of my construction company to a larger firm had already caught some attention. But when the local paper covered Thomas's estate settlement, my name was in bold print. Overnight, long-lost relatives appeared. Old acquaintances began calling, pretending they wanted to catch up. Even strangers wrote letters asking for donations, investments, handouts. I ignored most of them. I knew better than to trust sudden interest. And then, one evening, came the call I had been both dreading and expecting. Matthew. When I heard his voice for the first time in 25 years, every memory came flooding back. Him standing beside his mother, glaring at me with teenage contempt. His words that cut deeper than knives. You are just making excuses. Maybe if you had tried harder, none of this would have happened. I remembered the birthday cards I had mailed, only to see them returned unopened. The nights I sat by the phone, praying he would call. The Christmas mornings spent alone, listening to other families laugh. And now, after all that silence, he wanted me at his Christmas dinner. Not because he missed me, not because he loved me, but because he thought he could get a piece of what I had earned. I set the phone down after our conversation, my heart pounding, not from hurt but from clarity. For years I had dreamed of hearing from him, of being welcomed back into his life. But hearing him now, I realized something. The man he had become was not the boy I raised. He was Claire's son through and through, greedy, manipulative, always calculating. And yet, as much as the call sickened me, it also stirred something else. Resolve. If he wanted me at that Christmas table, I would come. But not to give him what he expected. I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the thick folder I had been keeping. Bank records, property deeds, investment papers, a lifetime of proof that the man they dismissed as a failure had become something entirely different. This folder was not just numbers. It was a weapon. And on Christmas Eve, I would bring it with me. The snow outside fell heavier, covering Dayton in silence. The city lights flickered under the storm, but I stood at my window with a steady heart. For 25 years, they had thought me broken, finished, beaten. Now it was my turn to show them the truth. I woke the next morning with a clarity I had not felt in years. The snowstorm had passed during the night, leaving Dayton blanketed in white, the streets quiet, the world almost too clean for the thoughts running through my head. I brewed coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the folder of documents spread before me. Bank statements, deeds, investments, all the evidence of what I had built when no one believed I could. I was still studying the papers when the phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a rush of cold recognition. It was not Matthew this time. It was Claire. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Hello." Her voice slipped through the line like smoke, soft but calculated. "Daniel, it has been a long time." "Claire?" I said, my tone flat. "To what do I owe this honor?" She gave a short laugh, the same one she used years ago whenever she wanted to smooth over a lie. "I know things ended badly between us, but we have a son together." That has to count for something. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Silence has a way of pulling the truth out of people. She filled the gap quickly. "I heard you spoke with Matthew yesterday. He was so happy to reconnect with you. He told me he invited you for Christmas." "Did he?" I replied. It was surprising after all this time. "Yes, well," she said, and her tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Daniel, I need to be honest with you. Matthew is in trouble. Real trouble." I leaned back in my chair, watching steam rise from my mug. "What kind of trouble?" "Business," she said quickly. "You know how volatile the market is these days. He took some risks, tried to build something, and it has not worked out. He has investors breathing down his neck, bills piling up, and if he does not come up with the money soon, I am afraid it could ruin him." The script was familiar. I had heard versions of it before, years ago when she used to corner me about bills or demand more than I could give. The tone was the same, urgent, emotional, manipulative. "Go on," I said evenly. She hesitated, then added, "We were hoping, with your recent good fortune, that maybe you could help. Just a little. For the sake of the grandchildren." There it was. The grandchildren. I had never met them, never been invited to a birthday or holiday, never even received a photograph. But now they were suddenly part of the bargaining table. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though my voice stayed calm. "Well," she said, her words careful, 200,000 would take care of the most urgent debts. But if you could manage 3, maybe 400, that would secure things for the future." The request landed like an insult. $400,000, spoken as casually as if she were asking me to pick up groceries. 400,000, I repeated. "That is quite the favor." "Daniel," she said, and her voice hardened with a mix of desperation and irritation. "This is your son we are talking about. He needs you. You cannot just abandon him." A wave of memories surged through me. Birthdays ignored, letters returned, hospital stays endured in silence. "Abandon him?" I said quietly. "Tell me, Claire, what about the times he abandoned me? What about the Christmas mornings when I sat alone? The surgery when I lay in a hospital bed with no visitors? The years of silence when he acted as if I did not exist? Was that not abandonment?" "That is ancient history," she snapped. "We are talking about now, about his future." I let the pause stretch, then spoke with steady finality. "No, not a cent. Not now, not ever." There was a gasp, sharp as ice breaking. "You cannot be serious. You want millions of dollars. What is a few 100,000 to save your own son?" "Not a cent," I repeated. My voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "You will regret this," she hissed. "You think you are teaching him a lesson, but you are just proving what a bitter, selfish man you always were." And just like that, she hung up. The line went dead. I set the phone down carefully and stared at the snow-covered street outside. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, rich with a sense of vindication I had never known before. 25 years ago, I would have broken. I would have written the check, desperate to buy back affection. But the man I had become understood something the old Daniel never had. Respect cannot be purchased, and love that only appears when money is on the table is no love at all. I leaned back, feeling my pulse steady. Claire's call had confirmed what I already suspected. The Christmas invitation was not about family. It was about money, and they thought they could play me like they once did. That night, I could not sleep. I sat at my desk long after midnight, rereading the notes I had begun to gather. Matthew's business was collapsing, yes, but there was more. I had contacts from my years in construction, men who now sat on boards, invested in startups, whispered about local scandals over drinks. From them, I had already heard the first cracks in Matthew's story. Failed deals, unpaid investors, lavish spending that did not match his earnings. And then there was Claire. She had always been clever, always able to twist sympathy to her advantage. A friend had mentioned she was running some sort of foundation, asking for donations under the guise of helping struggling families. Something about it did not sit right with me. I pulled my notebook closer and began to write names, companies, numbers, piecing together threads the way I once pieced together floor plans and budgets. Each line on the page was another path leading to the truth. They wanted to use me. Instead, I would expose them. The wind outside howled against the windows, but inside my kitchen, I felt steady. For years I had been silent, resigned to my exile. But now I had purpose. Christmas Eve was not going to be the reunion they imagined. It was going to be the stage for their undoing. The morning after Claire's call, I woke earlier than usual. Sleep had been broken, my dreams filled with old images. Matthew as a boy on his bicycle, Claire packing her suitcase, the look on their faces when they turned their backs on me all those years ago. But when I sat at my desk with coffee steaming in front of me, The heaviness in my chest was replaced by something sharper. Focus. I opened the folder where I kept my papers. Up until now, it was just a collection of documents proving my financial position. But that morning, it became something else. A case file. I had built businesses from scratch, learned how to spot weaknesses in structures before they collapsed. People were no different. All I had to do was follow the cracks. The first call I made was to an old acquaintance from my construction years, a man named Howard Green. Howard was no saint, but he always knew the gossip that moved through Dayton's business circles. He had a talent for remembering who owed who cheated who, and who was close to going under. When I mentioned Matthew's name, Howard let out a bitter chuckle. "Your boy? I thought you were smart enough not to get tangled with him. Brooks Innovations, right? That kid has burned through more money than half this town makes in a lifetime. Investors are circling like vultures. He promised some kind of software platform, something about digital real estate management. But it was smoke. Nothing but catered lunches and fancy offices. Now the well's dry and everyone's waiting for him to default." "How much does he owe?" I asked, my pen already scratching across my notebook. "North of $2 million, easy. That's just what I know about. A venture capital firm out of Columbus put in half of it. The rest came from private backers here in Dayton. I heard they're lawyering up names." Howard hesitated, then rattled off a few. "Davidson from Columbus. A couple of local dentists. And Helen Martinez, you probably know her. She lost $50,000 when he pitched that solar startup a few years back. I'd steer clear if I were you. They're angry, and rightfully so," I thanked him, though his words only steeled my resolve. Angry investors were not a threat to me. They were allies waiting to be discovered. The next step was digging into Claire's so-called foundation. I remembered the friend who mentioned her online fundraising. I had brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just another vanity project. But now my gut told me it was bigger. I went online and searched. It didn't take long to find. Family's First Foundation, registered under Claire Brooks. The website was glossy but shallow. Stock photos of smiling children, vague promises about supporting struggling households, no details on how donations were used. I clicked through page after page, noting the recurring button, Donate Now. Scrolling through her linked social media accounts made my blood run cold. Post after post showed her sitting in what looked like hospital rooms, her hair wrapped in scarves, her face pale and weary. The captions told a dramatic story of a woman fighting an unnamed illness, thanking her supporters for their generous contributions. Every few weeks there was an appeal for more money, citing medical bills not covered by insurance. I leaned back in my chair, disgust curling in my stomach. Claire had not changed. When she left me, she said she wanted stability and wealth. Now she had turned herself into a victim, milking strangers' sympathy. I had seen her health records once through a contact at the hospital years ago. She had no illness then. Was she really dying now? I doubted it. Still, doubt was not enough. I needed proof. I called another old connection, Janet Morrison, who worked in the records office at a local hospital. Janet's husband had been a dentist, whose books I once balanced in my early days as an accountant. She knew me as a man who never lied about numbers, never manipulated the truth. When she answered, her voice carried the same gentle warmth I remembered. "Janet, I need a favor," I said quietly. "It's about Claire." There was a pause. "Daniel, you know I'm not supposed to share patient information." "I know. But she's raising money on social media, claiming she's undergoing treatments. Good people are giving her money they can't afford." If she's lying, I let the sentence trail off. Janet sighed. You've always been straight with me. Give me some time. The next evening, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside were photocopies of Claire's records, annual checkups, a sinus infection, a dental cleaning, nothing else. No oncology visits, no chemotherapy, no cancer. I sat in my chair, the papers trembling slightly in my hands. She had staged the whole thing. The scarves, the pale makeup, the photos, all lies. She wasn't just scamming strangers. She was robbing the sick of sympathy, stealing hope from people who actually needed it. My disgust hardened into determination. I now had two trails: Matthew's collapsing business and Claire's fraudulent foundation. Both pointed to the same truth. They were drowning, and they thought I was their lifeline. But instead of throwing a rope, I was going to tie a weight to their ankles. Over the next week, I made calls. I reached out to Davidson, the venture capitalist from Columbus. He was cautious at first, suspicious of why I cared. But when I hinted that I had verifiable information about Matthew's whereabouts and his lifestyle, the man's tone shifted instantly. You know where he is? Davidson asked, his voice sharp. Yes, Dayton. Living comfortably, still projecting wealth. I can provide the address, phone number, and evidence. Do that, he said, urgency tightening his words. Our lawyers have been chasing shadows for months. If you can give us something concrete, you'll have friends here. I hung up, a grim smile tugging at my lips. Friends. I hadn't had many of those in years. But investors with money on the line could become allies fast. I contacted Helen Martinez next. When she picked up, her voice was weary, but still carried fire. If this is about Nicholas Brooks, she began, I swear I'm done chasing ghosts. Not Nicholas, I corrected. Matthew. My son. There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. Of course. Runs in the family, doesn't it? Always promising, never delivering. He owes you money. 50,000, she spat. Money I pulled out of my retirement account because he promised revolutionary technology. Now I'm back at work at 62. I can help you, I said. I know where he is. And I have evidence. By the end of the day, I had spoken to 7 different investors. Their stories blended together. Big promises, glossy presentations, vanishing results. Matthew had become a professional at selling dreams, taking money and moving on. But this time, he wasn't getting away. While gathering evidence on his investors, I also pieced together Claire's scam. I traced donations through her foundation's online accounts, noting how large spikes coincided with Matthew's lavish purchases. A new car appeared on his Instagram days after a major fundraiser. Expensive vacations lined up with Claire's most desperate appeals. They were funneling the money together, a mother and son operation of deceit. I printed everything: screenshots, bank records, posts, timelines. My folder thickened until it felt like a weapon in my hands. Each night, I imagined the Christmas dinner table. Claire smiling sweetly, Matthew pitching some new opportunity, both of them waiting for me to open my wallet. And then I pictured the moment when truth would arrive instead. The knock at the door, the delivery of lawsuits, the flood of notifications as their followers discovered the fraud, their faces draining of color as their empire crumbled. Justice was coming, and I was the architect. Christmas Eve arrived crisp and clear, the kind of winter morning where every breath hung in the air like smoke. I dressed carefully, choosing not a suit, not rags, but something simple and neat. Pressed trousers, a dark sweater, polished shoes. I wanted to look like a man who belonged, not one flaunting wealth or begging acceptance. My reflection in the mirror looked older, yes, but also steadier, sharper, like steel that had been hammered too many times to ever break again. I packed the folder into a leather satchel and set it by the door. My weapon was not a gun, not poison, not fire. It was truth, ink and paper, evidence and timing. They had played me with lies. I would end them with facts. The drive across Dayton took less than half an hour. Their house sat in a newer development on the edge of the city. Rows of nearly identical homes with vinyl siding and uneven Christmas lights. I pulled up to Matthew's driveway and killed the engine. For a moment, I sat in silence, watching the glow from their windows, the shadows moving inside. I could almost hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, the false warmth. Then the front door opened. Matthew stepped out, his smile wide, his arms spread as if he'd been welcoming me home all my life. "Dad, you made it." I climbed out of the truck, the winter air biting my cheeks. "Of course. Come in, he urged, ushering me toward the doorway. His wife appeared behind him, carrying a tray of glasses. 2 children peeked around the corner, curious, whispering to each other. They were my grandchildren, though to them I was a stranger. The thought stung for a second, but I tucked it away. This was not the night for nostalgia. Inside, the house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. The table was set for a feast, plates gleaming under the chandelier. Claire appeared from the kitchen, thinner than I remembered, but with the same calculating gleam in her eyes. She came forward, arms outstretched. "Daniel," she said smoothly, "it's been far too long." "Indeed," I replied, shaking her hand briefly before hanging my coat. Dinner began with forced cheer. Matthew poured wine, Claire asked polite questions about my health, and the children recited lines about school and presents. But beneath the surface, I felt the tension. Their eyes flicked to me when they thought I wasn't looking. Their smiles sharpened whenever money came close to the conversation. "So, Dad," Matthew began after the first course, carving into the turkey with exaggerated skill. "I was telling Claire the other day how amazing it is that you've done so well for yourself. Selling your company, the inheritance. It's inspiring, really." "Yes," Claire chimed in, her tone dripping with sweetness. "We're so happy for you, Daniel." "Truly. After all you've been through, it must feel like a second chance." I sipped my wine, meeting their gazes one by one. "It feels like hard work paying off. And perhaps a little luck, exactly," Matthew said eagerly. "And speaking of luck, I wanted to share something with you. I've been working on an opportunity, groundbreaking technology. We're talking about returns you wouldn't believe. I thought, since we're family, maybe you'd want to be part of it." There it was, the pitch. I leaned back in my chair, letting him talk. He rattled off numbers, percentages, projections. Claire nodded beside him, chiming in about legacy and future generations. The children had slipped away by then, leaving the adults at the table. Their absence made the room feel sharper, the stakes higher. When Matthew finished, I nodded slowly. "It sounds interesting." His eyes lit up. "So you'd consider investing?" I let silence stretch before answering. "Perhaps. But before we talk about opportunities, I have something for you." Claire's smile widened, greedy and expectant. "A surprise?" "Yes," I said, rising from my chair. I went to the coat rack and lifted the satchel. The weight of the folder pressed into my palm like iron. I returned to the table, placing it in front of me. "What is it?" Matthew asked, his voice rising with excitement. You'll see. But before I could open it, the doorbell rang. A sharp, authoritative knock followed, cutting through the festive music still playing faintly from the living room. Matthew frowned, glancing at Claire. I wasn't expecting anyone. He stood and walked to the door, pulling it open. Cold air swept inside as a man in a dark coat handed him an envelope. Matthew Brooks? Yes. You've been served. The man turned on his heel and left without another word. Matthew closed the door slowly, staring down at the thick packet in his hands. His face drained of color as he flipped through the pages. This can't be right. Claire hurried over, peering at the documents. What is it, honey? It's a lawsuit. Multiple lawsuits. Investors. They've found me. They're demanding repayment, freezing assets, threatening criminal charges. His hand shook as he dropped the packet onto the table. Pages spilled across the plates, legal language stark against the festive tablecloth. How did they even know where I was? Matthew whispered, his voice cracking. I kept my expression mild, sipping my wine. These things have a way of catching up to people. Claire's face twisted with fear, then sharpened into determination. She turned to me, her tone honeyed but desperate. Daniel, this is terrible timing. But you can help. With your resources. We can hire the best lawyers, the best public relations. We can make this disappear. Her phone buzzed then, vibrating against the table. She picked it up, her eyes widening as she scrolled. No, this isn't possible. Matthew leaned over her shoulder. What is it? Her voice broke. They're saying I faked my illness. Look at these comments. Matthew snatched the phone, reading aloud. Fraud. Scammer. Disgusting. There's hundreds. He scrolled faster, panic rising. News article. Dayton woman exposed for fake illness scam. His voice shook. They have medical records. Official documents. How? He stopped, staring at me. I placed my glass down carefully. Perhaps you should ask yourselves how. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the heater. Claire's hands trembled as she dropped the phone. This isn't true. Daniel, you know me. I would never... You would, I said quietly. You did. Matthew's face twisted in fury. You did this. You exposed us. I met his glare without flinching. No. You exposed yourselves. I just made sure the right people saw it. Claire reached across the table, her voice cracking into something that almost sounded like pleading. Daniel, please. Think of the grandchildren. Think of family. Help us through this, and we'll fix it together. I stood slowly, buttoning my coat. Family? I shook my head. You abandoned me for 25 years. You taught my son that wealth was worth more than loyalty. And now you want me to save you? Number. This is the life you built. You can live with it. Matthew rose, his face red, his hands balled into fists. You can't walk out. You owe us. I looked at him calmly. I owe you nothing. I turned toward the door, their voices chasing me. Daniel, wait! Please! Claire cried. Matthew shouted curses, his voice breaking with rage. But I kept walking. The cold air bit my face as I stepped outside, the sound of their panic muffled as the door closed behind me with a soft click. I walked to my truck, started the engine, and glanced once in the rearview mirror. Through the window, I saw Matthew pacing, waving his arms, Claire clutching her phone, both of them drowning in the consequences they had created. For 25 years, they thought I was broken. Tonight, they learned otherwise. I drove away from Matthew's house slowly, the snow crunching beneath my tires, the engine humming steady. Inside their warm living room, panic would now be spreading like wildfire. Claire, with her trembling hands, clutching a phone that betrayed her lies, Matthew with his lawsuits sprawled across the table, every page a nail in the coffin of his reputation. I imagined their voices rising, shouting, blaming one another. And for the first time in decades, I felt free. The streets of Dayton were quiet that night. Families gathered in their homes, their windows glowing with Christmas lights, children laughing as they tore open gifts. I passed them all, a ghost drifting through a world I had once longed for, but no longer envied. My holiday was not one of presents or music. My gift was truth, and I had delivered it cleanly. When I reached home, the silence greeted me like an old companion. I hung my coat, set the satchel on my desk, and poured myself a drink. Outside, snowflakes floated lazily under the street lamp. Inside, my house hummed with stillness, a stillness I had earned. But the quiet did not last. The phone began ringing the next morning, sharp and insistent. At first, I let it go to voicemail. Then curiosity got the better of me. I played the first message. "Dad." Matthew's voice came through, raw and panicked. "Listen, about last night. We were blindsided. The lawsuits, the articles. It's all a misunderstanding. You have to help me. They froze my accounts. They're coming after everything. Please, call me back." The second message was clear. "Daniel, I don't know what you think you've accomplished, but this is bigger than us. People are threatening us, calling us monsters. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing. Please, for God's sake, think of the children. Help us." By the time I checked the third message, her voice had shifted from pleading to sharpness. "If you don't step in, they'll destroy Matthew completely. Do you really want that on your conscience? He's your son." I deleted all three without replying. That afternoon, I drove into town for groceries. At the store, I overheard whispers near the checkout line. "Did you hear about that Brooks woman? Faked being sick, stole money from half the town, and her son running scams with investors. Disgusting." I kept my face neutral as I bagged my food. But inside, something burned. Not guilt, not pity, but justice. For years they had walked without consequence, while I carried the weight of abandonment. Now their names were mud, their reputations shredded. By evening, more messages filled my voicemail. Matthew's voice cracked under the strain. "Dad, they served notice on the house. The bank's freezing accounts. I don't know what to do. I need money, just to keep things afloat until I fix this. Please, Dad, I'll pay you back." I swear he said the last words as if he believed them, as if his entire life had not been proof to the contrary. Claire's messages were darker. "You're making a mistake, Daniel. You think this is justice, but it's cruelty. We're family. You'll regret this when you're old and alone, when there's no one left to visit you. Is that what you want? To die forgotten?" I poured myself another drink and stared out at the snow-covered street. Her words might have once pierced me, but not anymore. Dying alone had always been my reality. I had accepted it long ago. What mattered now was that the lies were ending. The next day, I received a call from Helen Martinez. Her voice brimmed with satisfaction. "Daniel, you won't believe it. Our lawyers hit him hard this morning. Emergency injunctions, asset freezes. He's scrambling. Thank you for everything you've done. You've given us a fighting chance." I closed my eyes, picturing Matthew frantically making calls, trying to stall lawyers, trying to conjure money that no longer existed. "I didn't do it for thanks," I said quietly. "Maybe not," she replied. "But you've restored faith for a lot of us. We'll never forget it. The local news carried the story that evening. Reporters stood outside Matthew's house, their voices serious as they explained how a once promising entrepreneur faced multiple lawsuits for fraud and misrepresentation. Images of Claire appeared on the screen too, her Facebook posts juxtaposed with hospital records showing no trace of cancer. The anchor's words cut sharper than any blade. A mother and son duo accused of exploiting trust, draining donors, and deceiving investors. The next morning, Matthew himself showed up at my door. When I opened it, he looked nothing like the confident man who had greeted me days before. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, his shoulders slumped under invisible weight. "Dad," he croaked. "Please." I stepped aside just enough for him to enter. He sat at my kitchen table, staring at the folder still resting on the surface. "You did this," he whispered. I poured him a glass of water and slid it across. "No, you did this. I only let the truth out." "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "They'll take everything. The house, the cars, my accounts. I'll have nothing." I leaned forward. "Do you know what it feels like to have nothing, Matthew? To sit in a bare apartment at 45 years old, abandoned by the woman you loved and the son you raised? To spend Christmas alone year after year while your letters come back unopened?" "You're about to learn." He buried his face in his hands. For a long time, we sat in silence. Finally, he looked up, his eyes wet. "Dad, I made mistakes. I listened to Mom. I thought chasing money was the answer. But I can change. I can fix it. If you just give me a chance." His words should have moved me. Once, they would have. But I saw no boy in front of me, no son who needed guidance. I saw a man shaped by greed, too old for excuses. "You've had 25 years of chances," I said evenly. "This is the result." He slammed his hand on the table, anger flashing. "You think this makes you better than me? You think ruining your own family is victory? You're pathetic." I rose calmly and walked to the door. "Get out, Matthew." He stood trembling, his fists clenched as if he might strike me. But then his shoulders sagged, and he shuffled toward the exit. At the door, he turned. "You'll die alone, old man." "No one will mourn you." I opened the door wide. "Better alone than surrounded by liars." He left without another word, his figure swallowed by the falling snow. That night, I received one final voicemail from Claire. Her voice was ragged, desperate. "Daniel, they're taking everything. People are threatening us online. Matthew blames me, I blame him. Our family is falling apart. You've won. Are you happy now?" I deleted it without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, news of their collapse spread. Matthew's company filed for bankruptcy. Claire's foundation was shut down, her accounts frozen pending criminal investigation. The donors she had manipulated demanded refunds she could never give. Their names became a curse in Dayton. Meanwhile, I walked through my neighborhood quietly, greeted by nods and smiles. People didn't know my part in it all. They only knew the truth had caught up with liars. And for me, that was enough. But in the weeks that followed Christmas Eve, I discovered that revenge is not only about exposing others, it is also about freeing yourself. For 25 years, I had carried a weight on my chest, the weight of being forgotten, betrayed, abandoned by the two people who should have stood by me no matter what. Every December, every holiday, every birthday, that silence echoed louder. But now, for the first time, the silence was mine. It was not punishment anymore. It was peace. The town kept buzzing with news of Matthew and Claire's downfall. The lawsuits multiplied, dragging Matthew through hearings where investors presented evidence I had quietly provided. Judges were unsympathetic. fraud, misrepresentation, breach of contract. The list grew longer with each case. The man who once strutted through Dayton in new suits and shiny cars was now cornered, his accounts frozen, his businesses dissolved. I heard through the grapevine that he had to sell furniture, electronics, anything of value, just to cover legal fees. Claire's collapse was even harsher. The foundation she had paraded online became a national story for a brief moment, one of those cases news anchors shake their heads at. Local woman fakes illness, steals thousands in donations. Reporters interviewed former donors, some crying, some furious, all betrayed. Authorities opened a fraud investigation, and her social media pages, once filled with sympathy and prayer emojis, turned into walls of anger and disgust. She could not walk into a grocery store without whispers following her. And yet, in all of this, I stayed silent. I never boasted, never claimed credit. Let them think fate caught up. I had no need for recognition. My satisfaction came each morning when I poured my coffee, looked out at the snow-covered street, and felt lighter than I had in decades. One cold January morning, I was walking back from the library when Father Martinez stopped me on the sidewalk. He had known me for years, though I had never been more than a shadow in the pews on Sundays. "You look different, Daniel," he said, his eyes studying me. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter. As if something has been lifted off your shoulders," I smiled faintly. "Maybe it has." He nodded, as if he understood without needing the details. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or police. Sometimes it comes when the truth finally breathes. I carried those words with me. They felt right. As the months passed, I began to change in small ways. I signed up to volunteer at the community center on Tuesdays, helping adults learn basic math for their GED exams. Numbers had been my language for years, and now I could use them to give someone else a second chance. On Thursdays, I joined a group that delivered food to shut-ins, men and women who were truly alone, not by betrayal, but by circumstance. For the first time, my presence mattered not because of money, but because of time given freely. It was during one of those deliveries that I met Margaret, a retired teacher with a laugh that could fill a room. She told me about her years working in schools, about children who came from nothing but still dreamed big. We talked about books, about the cold beauty of Ohio winters, about life's cruel and kind turns. For the first time since Claire left, I found myself smiling not out of bitterness, but out of genuine connection. Meanwhile, news of Matthew and Claire continued to reach me in fragments. A former tenant mentioned seeing Matthew's house emptied out, foreclosure signs planted in the yard. A woman at church said she heard Claire had moved in with a distant cousin, unable to afford rent. Every update was another reminder. They had built their lives on greed and deceit, and greed and deceit had devoured them. One evening in late spring, as I was preparing dinner, my phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed Matthew's number. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment before I let it ring. The voicemail that followed was long, rambling, desperate. "Dad, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've done terrible things. But everything is gone. The house, the business, Mom. She blames me for everything. I don't even know where to go anymore. I don't want to lose you too. Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Give me a chance. Call me back." I listened to the message once, then deleted it, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. The boy I raised was gone long ago. The man on that message was a stranger molded by his mother's greed. And I no longer had space in my life for strangers who only came with empty hands and open palms. Instead, I packed a bag and drove west the next morning. I had always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, to stand at the edge of something so vast it reminded me how small my pain truly was. On the way, I stopped in small towns, ate in diners where no one knew my name, slept in motels with flickering neon signs. For the first time in decades, I felt like life stretched out before me, not as a burden, but as a road waiting to be traveled. At the Grand Canyon, I stood at the edge as the sun set, the sky painted in fire and gold. The vastness swallowed me, humbled me, healed me. I thought of Matthew and Claire, their lives shrinking while mine expanded. I thought of the years I had wasted waiting for a phone call that never came. And I finally understood that I had been waiting for the wrong thing all along. When I returned to Dayton weeks later, I drove past the street where Matthew's house once stood proud. The windows were boarded now, the yard unkempt, a shell of a home for the shell of a life he had built. I did not stop. I did not need to. Justice had already been served. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of tea warming my hands, the same table where I once sat broken, wondering how I would survive. Now it was a place of peace. My home was quiet, yes, but no longer lonely. It was filled with the weight of choices made, of battles fought, of dignity reclaimed. I realized then that revenge had never really been about destroying them. It had been about reclaiming myself. And in that I had won. This is the final line of Part 8. I realized then that revenge had never really been about destroying them. It had been about reclaiming myself. And in that, I had won. If you like this story, subscribe and tell us about your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on the screen.